Welcome to Rolling Through Okay, so hang on. Welcome to Rolling Through Negotiations, the podcast that blends the strategic mindset of BJJ athletes with insights from business owners and leaders from First Nations communities to explore how physical well-being, mental resilience, and professional development are all connected, can help you in negotiations, and can help you with your life.
Love that. Absolutely love that.
Awesome. And I reckon you'll love this quote too, because the quote's this: don't waste your time and energy on those that waste your time and energy.
Absolutely.
An important bit, read that again. So let's do that. Don't waste your time and energy on those that waste your time and energy. That quote comes directly from our amazing, deadly guest here with us today, Jeffrey Morgan.
Thanks for
Jeffrey,
having
how are you
me. And
today, brother?
mate, blessed and grateful to be here and be able to share space with yourself, brother. And those quotes, a very powerful one after 20 years in custody that sat true with myself and understanding that quote from its deepest level. And quotes in general, always go in and understand what that quote means and where it could come from. If you get context to the individual and wrap it around that, what are you doing with your life? Because a lot of us are prisoners of our own mindset. So we sort of give up our time for everybody else and we forget about ourselves.
Mm, I love it. It's so
It's
it's so
huge.
deep. And and before we
Way to
go into
start.
the depth of this conversation, I'm so pumped to have this conversation with you, brother. Before we get started, though, I just want to acknowledge the First Nations peoples as traditional custodians of the lands in which we're on, all throughout Australia. We pay our respects to our elders, past, present, and emerging, and to our next generational leaders in pursuit of the brighter future. And
Love
I'm recording this right here on Ghana country. Whose country are you on right now, brother?
Gadigal of
Awesome.
the Eora Nation down here in Sydney, beautiful Sydney. It's where I grew up and it's my second home. Obviously, Walgett, I'm a proud Camilleri man. But in saying that, I'm also, part of the community down here and grown up that way for a long time and recognized within the community here. And yeah, it's been a long journey through the community, but also one that I'm proud of. The whole community's been through a transition, and Redfern, if for those that know, it was one of Australia's most notorious streets, and if you went down there now, you wouldn't even recognise it.
Mhm. How's it changed?
Oh, it's changed for the better. At the time, a lot of people were up in arms about obviously moving out because of such a tight-knit community. But at the same time, I've seen the benefits around obviously the health of our people, the outcomes of our people. And when I say outcomes, where we're working more, we're more committed to our families in the sense of actually going to work and making sure we're providing in the right sense. We're not getting locked up. It's not a badge of honor. Drugs and alcohol started to obviously dampen, and if it's done socially, it's a different conversation down there. And I just think that a lot more people are business orientated, a lot more people are training, a lot more people are educating themselves, and that just wasn't the case way back when. So obviously, a lot of trauma coming through that sort of time frame back in the 80s, especially from the stolen generation, now grandparents and other communities within that space. We had such a broad bunch of people coming together from all different, it could be from Moree, Kempsey, Walgett,
Mm.
Dubbo, and we had all these people down here, such a diverse bunch of mob, and to be able to get together and see them striving now
Mm.
and thriving now rather than just surviving is priceless.
Awesome.
Uh,
And
Unbelievable.
you're a great example of this notion, this journey of thriving rather than just surviving. And brother, your journey's been amazing.
Oh, thanks. I appreciate that. It means a lot. And sometimes you've sat with yourself so long that you forget about how far you've actually come.
Mm.
And some people do. They're in their own journeys, and life's a journey in itself, right? So celebrate all those moments. Probably one thing I didn't do, even when I was in custody, I was starting to take that deep dive on myself. How are you built? Is it truly serving yourself? And having a look at those, deep dive moments, I never actually said, how good is this to be able to, I could feel the change happening, but I never celebrated it. I think
Mm,
I probably doubted myself in that journey, as most of us would in any journey towards transition. But my biggest advice to everybody out there is to, you know, celebrate those little moments when you have those little wins because it will keep you going. It starts to build that confidence and respect for yourself. And respect for yourself means respect for our culture, and respect for our culture means connection to our culture.
mm.
We lost our identity through that journey, and what that meant, the language that was spoken within tribes, the connection to country. Yeah, we were rubbishing our country. Graffiti was all over these houses. Yet our ancestors fought for this land. So to be able to gain that respect back for our culture and starting to see that being practiced in the communities, just to make celebrate that on that journey. It's a proud culture, but it's also you don't have to be. Your culture could be just within yourself. You might not be Aboriginal, or you might not be, of what you deem a culture. But everyone has their own culture, and make sure you celebrate that little win on the journey, on those journeys towards the better self.
Yeah, and I can imagine when you speak about that journey within yourself, for some reason I've got this image popping up, and I've never personally been incarcerated. I've actually never
Yes.
even been inside a prison.
Yeah,
For some reason, I can see this image of someone within the confines of a prison cell, and that experience of isolation possibly being used as a vehicle to trigger that journey within yourself.
absolutely.
Do you feel like that journey and going within yourself was a big part of you being able to transform in your past from being a bank robber to now being such an amazing mindset coach?
Absolutely. Like, there's data now behind all of this as well, where once you have your time to yourself,
Mm,
and hence why we have mindfulness and meditation, so you can actually go back and go back to those experiences of life. What were the lessons that became blessings within those spaces? Even if you see that as traumatic, how can you flip that perspective and then start to look at that through a different lens? And for me, that time in that cell, I was deep diving on myself. I did a live autopsy,
mhm,
literally. I call it a live autopsy, just cut myself open.
mm,
How are you built? Wow, have a look at this. I was staunch and loyal. I'll give you an example. Staunch and loyal, don't dob anybody in. We had
mm,
the same crew for 20 years, so we were very well respected because of that attitude. But at the same time, I was a staunch and loyal to my kids. I'd left
mm.
them posted as a father or parent father. So I started to do those deep dives, all these oxymorons or whatever, the perception correction I had to do on myself. And that just meant that that deep dive autopsy on myself, I started to write down, wow, you built like this, you built like that. Is it truly what you want out of this life? Are you happy in this life? And I used to tell myself, like many people, that we are happy in life, but I had to exchange, time for money. So realistically, was I happy in this so-called great world where we're making great money and there's girls around us and we're living this life? But
Mm.
you're exchanging that for money. You're away from your kids. You're serving time. I lost a lot of my 20s and in custody. And they're those years where you really develop into, who you can be. And I think that for me was just a lot of self-reflection. And that's where I know the power of being able to sit with yourself, being away from people, and actually connecting to the truest version of yourself, which means you have to look at the ugly version, the one you don't want to look at. And that deep dive, that allows you to then start to create solutions to your problems. And it's very hard to do because most people don't want to go down that ugly, dirty, angry, whatever version it was, that was projecting out to the world. And when you do it's a scary place. You have some deep thoughts in amongst that, Matt. And for me, that's just one of the hardest things I've ever done. But when I did that, that would have been the conversation. Now look at it was one of the greatest things I ever done for, the opportunity to gain back life again.
Yeah, and so it's awesome you speak about gaining. And in what you've just shared, you also spoke about loss.
Mm,
And
absolutely.
those two notions, those two sentiments are almost like opposite ends of the chessboard.
Absolutely.
Can we truly have a gain without experiencing a loss?
I believe so. We've definitely done that, but we've also learned a lot. Someone's been through something to have taught us something in general, right? So if you look at down that path, or whether the loss is the loss of time that you put in some time, energy, and effort into a space.
Mm,
BJJ is a great example of that. You might come into a space, a coach has gone through years and years of training to be able to time compress something for yourself and say, here's the gift of being able to, run this maneuver in a
mm,
short period of time, and where that person had to go through years of experience when they first started out. And BJJ was first recognized in Australia as an example, and coaches were just starting to take that on board. So it's it's a interesting question that I've never thought about, to be honest. But realistically, we've all had to go through something to learn something.
mm.
And there are innovators out there, but in saying that, look at Thomas Edison. As much as he was an innovator around light, at the same time, he had 1,000 failures, if you want to put it that way, before he was successful. So I'd say, yeah, you'd probably have to go through something. And that's where the great coaches of this world, when we listen and learn, we earn from them because they've been there, done that. And
Mm.
that time compression, sometimes that can save you years. And, break it down in the simplest form. You lock yourself out of the house, the bloke comes up and, cracks the door in 2 seconds and says $300 or whatever it is. And you're like,
Mm.
$300, it took you 2 seconds. It was the years behind that experience that allowed you to get the quickest outcome you possibly could get. And the same
Yes.
principle applies within your health, your business, relationships, finances, or whatever these other pillars are of life. So, in regards to your question, I'd say most of the time it'd be coming from lived experience and someone having to have gone through something to get to something.
Mm. I think
Great question.
the great Tony Robbins speaks of change a lot. And one of the things he says is a great way to change is to change the way you look at things. So I think his term, and you're nodding your head, brother, you've read it, you're a guru in this area. So
Mm.
I think his words are something like, if you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change.
Absolutely. It didn't happen to you. So I used to always look at, oh, it's happening to us, the
Mm,
police, the government, the past, all of the above, my parents. And as soon as I flipped that and started to say, what were the lessons that became blessings from that moment there? What about that one there? And what about that one there? I started to see through this different lens, and it became a strength rather than a weakness, because what will happen organically, our brain goes back to that limbic brain, grabs the emotion, the experience that creates an emotion. Now, you go through that whole little vicious cycle of dealing with the emotion, turning on that music, and talking to, hey, Matty, guess what? You know what happened to me in the past? We might ring 10 people, 5 people, whatever it may be. And now we're in this vicious loop, we're going through that cycle. And the more we do that, the more
mm,
we strengthen it, right? So
mm,
for me, I started to go, well, if I keep talking about it, I'll actually be strong at it. Is it what I want to be strong at? And I'm like, not really. Who wants to be strong at sadness, depression, heartache, pain, suffering, whatever you want to call it, right? So I just went, how could I flip that perspective? What did I learn from it? How can I grow from it? And how do I prosper from this? And sometimes prosper means being able to find inner peace or peace of mind. It's priceless, right? So to be able to do that and flip that perspective, I started to shift and change in custody and say, it's not happening to me, it's happening for me. And that became, the ultimate strength. Obviously a complex pathway to
mm.
go down there, especially neurologically. But in general, for us, it's just being able to understand that at base level, change it from 2 to 4, and you'll start to see things differently.
So right now I'm picturing a very handsome Jeffrey Morgan in his 20s with flowing,
Early hair.
amazing locks of curly hair, right?
Yeah,
Right there in custody. And one day he experiences a moment, this moment of change.
love
Can
that.
you can you build onto this story and explain and share what that particular moment was like? when that change was triggered? Where were you? What were you smelling? What were you seeing? What
Mm.
was the depth of that experience?
It was pretty crazy actually, because I can tell you when it happened.
Yeah.
It was an unfortunate situation. I was in Pod 11 at MRRC, which was the remand centre at the time, and I
Mm.
had a young kid sing out to me and say, "Hey, Morgs, are you awake?" It was about 3 o'clock in the morning. I said, "No, but is everything okay?" And he's like, "I don't worry about it. I'll speak to you in the morning." Unfortunately, that kid never walked out of his cell, and his
Mm.
parents walked into that wing, and they were sobbing as they entered the unit. And I sat there and I was like, "Is this the life you want to keep living? Is this it? Is this what it's all about?" And seeing them so sad, I was thinking about my parents, because you don't get to see your parents, I suppose, in that light. You see people on a visit, but this was, a possibility. You could die in this cell, and yeah, this is what's going to happen. Your parents are going to walk in, and to see that happen and speak to that kid that night, that left me to, yeah, that started, I started to ask questions and just
Mm.
say, is this what you want? Do you want to die here? Like, and it took a lot of transition, because I had great intentions, but bad habits always do undo bad intentions, good intentions. And for me, yeah, it's the weight loss scenario. I'm going to lose weight Jan 1st, or I'm going to start a fitness journey. We start it, and then, the intentions are great, but the habits are bad. So I want that cake again. So now I'm in this vicious loop. And that for
Mm.
me, unfortunately, was, I'd grown up around that community. We'd gone through so much. We'd gone to battles and wars, literally, we're running battles with police, running riots with police, throwing bricks at police. And it's just to be able to, I had to start to think, I got to remove myself from this community. Very hard to do.
Mm.
And I didn't want to do it, but I knew if I stuck around and I hung around, there was more riots after I left. I would have been up the front, part of that crew, and just going back and forward in custody. So I started to make that intention, hear that kid's mother wail in the unit, hear, you can't do nothing but shed a tear, and you can be the toughest man in that jail. And just to see their parents, I doubt any person that was sitting there watching that didn't
Mm.
didn't shed a tear for the family. And sometimes it takes something to evoke something else, and that, it really stirred something up, not only inside myself, but I know a lot of other people that were in that unit that day.
So thank you very much for sharing that, brother.
It was a crazy story, man. And to this day, I'll never forget it. And it came on the back end of, prior to that, there was an old Lebanese man that was in the unit, and it was probably a month before, a couple of months before, and he tried to smuggle some drugs into Australia. He was, in his 60s, 70s, got caught, and was just trying to help his family out, and probably thought it was a quick way of doing it, wouldn't have a drama, and he ended up in there, and he ended up dying from a heart attack. So it's sort of, I think those two experiences in a shorter period of time really flipped things. And it
Mm.
might have been, look, it might have been a long period of time. When you're in there, time just doesn't, you don't really, oh, it's January the 1st, 2021. You just don't count. You just roll with it and hope that your days go quicker than most. But to see that and then roll into the young kid, it really sort of started to get something stirred up inside myself. And that was prior to, at 16, being in Everly Street, walking up the lane, seeing everyone fighting, blood everywhere, people shooting up, thinking this was all normal toxic behavior. Like everything was toxic walking up that one lane in one day. And I was just like, this can't be what we are. Like, from what I'm learning about our people, this isn't Aboriginal people in my head. So, I just wanted to make a stand, and that was the direction I took. And I think those three moments will forever live in my memory.
Yeah, awesome. And then awesome in that you're sharing, and awesome the growth
Mm,
and wisdom that you've taken from that experience and completely changed the direction of your life.
absolutely.
How, just say we've got people leaning in, listening to you right now, and they're thinking, man, I want to change my life just like this. if we take an experience, so you were talking about some of the experiences that you had growing up and what it was like sort of, in the streets and all this sort of stuff. And we've just touched on this and I appreciate that vulnerability and sharing. There's directions and choices like you've shared that come
Mm,
about as a result of those experiences. And I can,
absolutely.
as you speak, I can visualize like a crossroads. We got this experience, it's a shitty experience. One option could be doing something bad as a result of that experience. The
Mm.
other option could be doing something good and strengthening as a result of the experience. When you're at that fork of the crossroad, the pinnacle moment, how can we decide the right way?
First things first, you got to challenge the first thought. So my
Mm,
first thought around all of this F the system and F the government and F the police and all of the above. And I had to challenge that and say, has that got you to where you need to be? You're sitting in a cell serving X amount of time, or I might have been about to be sentenced for a bank robbery that I committed up there. And I'm like, you're not where you want to be, but he's you're talking this language. Is it really their fault? And then you have to look at your skills and capabilities. What education did I have, and what lived experience? So those two things, I say to everybody: if you don't have education behind the pathway you want to take, you're always going to doubt yourself. You lack
mm,
confidence, right? Then you're going to go into the invisible backpack, which we all carry. And inside that invisible backpack is a moment or experience in life that created the character and person you are today. So until you grab that and say, all right, here's what happened in custody, here's what happened in Redfern, here's what happened in a relationship, here's what happened in my business as examples, you're always going to just look at it from the lens of what's been stored in your limbic brain. And then you go through that vicious cycle I spoke about before, and that will be your response. You just go through that on loop every single time, even if it's years later and you hear that song from back then, until you say, was I built right? So I had cheated myself. I was, built from that area, cheating quite a lot on all my partners. And, I'd cry about when they left me.
mm,
I'd say, oh, I love these girls. And I'd be like, well, do you know what love is? Do you know,
mm,
you didn't really get love. So what is love? And what is loyalty? What is, once again, the oxymoron of don't dob your mates in, but then cheat on your partner. So loyalty, the word, it was out there, but it wasn't being practiced and lived by. Unpacking that invisible backpack, what happened to you actually happened for you? What was the lesson that became a blessing? How did you learn from it, grow from it, prosper from it? And once you take that path, how can I educate myself and live the experience, meaning practice that as a habit and ritual for a period of time until it becomes a part of my DNA? And behind all of that, why do you want to do it? What's your why to do this? And I
mm,
was like, you say that life's good here, but I was in such pain behind that cell door. And men can come on here and be tough. Oh, yeah, I did it easy. I stood on my head and, I would have done another 20 years. The reality is, none of us want to be in there. And that's just the reality. Sometimes we just build a specific way. And until I was starting to challenge that at 16 and say, wait a second, how can I build myself better? And that's the process I went through. Unpack that invisible backpack, learn what pillars you're not strong in life, and whether it's financially, relationships, loyalty, respect. It could be a word, it could be a pillar. And then I started to just build that into myself and ask those questions. And I challenged every first thought, because my first thought, if you said something bad, it was violence.
mm.
So I was like, does that serve you? I could, assault somebody, but I end up serving more time and I'm away from my kids. Is that a smart move? Even if I want to stay in this world, who would want to do that, right? I'd rather get out sooner rather than later. How can I deal with this as best I can? So I was looking at all these different strategies, how to manage my emotions, and that ended up, changing my emotional IQ by shifting every first thought and saying, what that does is put you in a bad position, a dangerous position, an angry position, a position that none of us would choose within our life. So what you tell yourself is actually bullshit. Let's start the shift and change that. And what do you want in that space, and how would you replace it? And that's where the magic happened.
With your ability to speak so well, like you do, and share this vehicle of change and express yourself in terms of creating these kinds of changes, something that you've always had, or did this ability to communicate flow from the change that took place?
No, I think because when I was in custody, there was a lot of race wars, different nationalities fighting one another in custody. And I got into a lot of negotiations, I
Mm,
suppose, and effective communication. And I probably did it without before the before it kicked off. I'd talk to everybody, and
mm.
some people would say, "Oh, you're crazy. You're going over with the Asians, or you're crazy going over with the Islanders or the Lebanese." But as long as you treated people with respect, they'd always respect you. And some of them wouldn't. They'd come, heavy-handed and get out of here. Who are you? This, that, and the other. And then how do you negotiate in that conversation to get everybody to see by getting on with one another, it's going to be a better place for us all. And I think that, not think, I know that turned me into who I was today, being able to negotiate in such a volatile, small area. I just went, if you can do it here, you can do it anyway.
Yeah.
And when someone says, "Oh, that's hard," I'm like, "Oh, mate, I'll show you hard. I'll put you in this yard, and you don't know if someone's going to pull something out and put it in your neck." That's the reality, and that's a depth of that conversation. So, if you can negotiate under those stresses, imagine what you could do in a business deal or with the life you want, or helping a person see things through a different light. So the rest became very easy for me.
Yeah. And I think that the experience that you would have had in negotiating whilst in custody and those stresses would make you an absolute black belt negotiator.
Absolutely. Bit like, yeah, and this is important for people. A lot of people don't do a skills audit. So sometimes they don't have a PhD or a doctorate. So they feel that they're inadequate. But what skills do you have? So I became that master negotiator. And for me, that became, whether it's effective communication, and that if you can do that to yourself, you can really sit down and deep dive and say, all right, how am I building this light? And what I've been telling myself, I'd say, okay, I love this lifestyle. Give me the key. I'll walk out tomorrow. So I always looked at that projection of, um, I'll handle anything that you throw at me, but you're not really happy with it. And I realized when I started to do corporate programs, a lot of people say they're great. Yeah, I'm happy with my life. I say, would you travel more? Yes, I would. Would you like to spend more time with your family? Yes, I would. Would you like to be able to do what you want, when you want, with who you want, as much as you want, without a worry in the world? Yes, I would. So we just end up accepting life rather than designing life. And uh, I sort of just accepted mine and went with the program of the environment. And that toxicity became all of me. So you've got to be able to sit down with yourself, negotiate with yourself. Where are you? Where do you really want to be? And that's basically what we do as a business. Where are you? And people say, I'm here. Here's what I'd like to get out of life, and we close that gap in between by creating a roadmap to their life and the GPS to their life. And that ultimately allows you to get rid of what you're telling yourself or accepting within yourself. And that's a powerful thing. How much is inner peace worth? Just as one example, to sleep better, to communicate better, to stress less, to be able to handle your emotions. Like, they're just priceless, every single one of those. And that list could go on forever.
Yeah, and you're an amazing example of someone who has mastered the inner game of life, of
Absolutely.
negotiations, and then from that platform, capable, extremely capable
Mm.
of demonstrating and applying the right skills in a whole range of areas, whether it be in business, whether it be in health and fitness, in life overall, to achieve amazing outcomes. And given that the starting place for success really is that mental excellence,
Absolutely.
the technical side of things is still important, right? So if we say there's this young fella, he's being incarcerated for the very first time, and this poor young fella's got absolutely no idea about how to negotiate. What
Absolutely.
would be, say, the top four technical pieces that you would explain to this young fella so that he can negotiate well during his time in incarceration?
You got to get in. So anybody said you get into your own. So you do that autopsy and go through the maze with inside your body. The
Mm,
maze leads to all the different pillars at the end. different points that you find that checkpoint, I suppose, within that body. And for me, with the kid, say we go into custody, a lot of the times, I've got to get them to be able to see it through their lens, not mine.
Yeah.
Because if I tell them, oh, like you shouldn't be here, and you've got to be careful, you've got to negotiate things, otherwise things are going to go bad. Oh, I don't care, I'll smash anyone. That's usually what you'll get as a response. So to be able to do that, I've got to go into their head and think how they're thinking. And
Mm.
a great example is I ask them, if I was to disrespect your family, what would you do to me? And obviously you get a pretty heavy response in that regard, understandably coming from that world.
Yes.
And I then turn around and says, so can I ask you, why is it okay for you to disrespect your parents?
Yes.
They look at me and they go, I've never thought about it like that. So it's just being able to get them to understand it from their perspective, not mine. Otherwise, and this is where society gets it wrong all the time, to be straight out and honest. Lock them up, throw away the key. And I understand that. I don't want to see crime happening on the streets, but does it actually change the outcome because the person's still built of the same behaviors and patterns and so forth? So those values within themselves, where stuff the world, stuff the police, from an Aboriginal perspective, stuff non-Aboriginal people. And I say non-Aboriginal because I don't get into black and white. I get into all human beings.
Mhm.
But in general, once you understand that, you can really dive deep on this individual, and then getting them to see, same again, mate, you could be the best fighter, but I can guarantee when four blokes jump you because you
Mm.
think you're tough. And so how do I get them to understand that conversation? And when you're same thing, you're asking them, would you like to get your head, stomped on? And that's pretty much the realest conversation around it. You can go out to the world, mate, but let me tell you, it's big and bad in this world. And from boys' home to jail, it becomes a whole different world. And being able to get people to understand, especially these young kids that come through, you might be tough in your area, but I can guarantee someone will do something, and you don't get a second chance in here. And getting them to understand that conversation is a powerful one. Now, if you translate that into business, people say, I can say, if you take this scenario, what will end up happening? You could, more than likely, you're going to end up in a position of bankruptcy or going, your business closing down. If this happens in a relationship, your values aren't set and your partner's going to leave you. What would that mean to you? And if someone says, oh, it would mean nothing, then I say, well, then more than likely this relationship ain't one that you actually value. So
Mm.
being able to get them to see that. And we've had people through the program that have left their marriages because they've seen the value in them, but not the value being given to them. So the same principle of business. I thought I was passionate about that because I wanted to make money. My passion actually lies over here. They've transitioned over and they've made millions of dollars. So it just comes down to understanding the person on the other side and, using what some you could call it the Socratic method, where you're basically getting them to answer their own questions, and then the light bulb moment goes off, and that allows them to understand how they're built with inside themselves. And I learned that just by doing that to myself without understanding what that was. And someone recently said, do you know what? Do you know how you teach? You teach like this. And I went back and had a look, and I was like, it actually is. It's just the Romans used it. It was just to get people to understand how they were built. And does it serve you, Matt? And well, if it doesn't, here's the first recommendations I'd put before yourself. How do they look to you? And if they don't look right, let's find another avenue. And they don't look right, keep going until they find that they're happy, content, fulfilled, directional, intentional to what we call their roadmap of life. And now we've got somebody that's living every day with a purpose and a vision and a why. And their feet hit that ground, they hit it with intentions, mate, and that's where the magic happens for them.
I love this. I love it. One of the reasons is because you, as a black fellow, speak about the Socratic Greek method, which is fantastic, bringing that
Yes,
multiculturalism into play.
yeah,
And
and it
then,
was actually it was a Greek method. I did say Roman. It was a Greek method, and it was so brought to light by Dane Walker, who's rebranding the business, and we're about to go through a whole rebrand and digital products and all of the above. And Dane said, "Do you know how you teach?" And I was like, "No." And he goes, "This specific way, and have a look." So I had a look, and obviously, it's huge. One, because that way they're not going to argue with themselves. And I learned it from, funnily enough, I learned it from police prosecutors, because they'd try and get me during trials to say something and then
Yeah.
say, "Oh, you said you were there, and now you're saying you're not there. What? Wait a second. Do you know what you're actually saying?"
Mm.
So I learned that, and I became very smart in the art of negotiation or conversation or answering the questions, thinking about why he was leading me down a path. And I'll lead someone down a path, and then once you're there, there's no way out of it because you've just answered it yourself. And now you're in a dead end. You go, "Oh, I just said yes to all that." And now he's made me realize it's me. And
Yes.
until I look at me, I'm never going to change me. So, would you like help changing it? Or it's up to yourself. And they're like, "Yeah, I would actually." And off we go. Priceless.
I love it, brother. I love the way you've been able to share a technical tip of negotiations, and we've got also here, the bank robber being cross-examined, teaching a lawyer how to negotiate in the box. I love it. It's a really good, really
Uh,
good one there. And
Johnny Stratton was my barrister,
yep.
QC. And Johnny was awesome. And I remember the first time they're like, "Don't get in there, they're going to tear you to shreds." And after it, he's like, "We'll get you in there anytime." So um, it's you've got to get that conversation out of somebody to understand how they're built. Because most of people, when I say most people, over 90% of people unconscious within their life. And
Mm.
that what that means is they'll go through life. You're born, you go through school, you go to uni, you get a partner. The program of life. And what we then, oh, I'd love to travel more. I wish I went. I wish I started that business. I want to write a book. I want to do something else within my life. But we just don't do it because we don't feel we can, and because we're stuck in the grind of life. And until you ask yourself these questions, you won't evoke what you know is possible, and you won't evoke those light bulb moments. And those light bulb moments, I can't tell you what they're worth to people that have been through our program. Just life changing.
It's awesome, and I love your uppermost emphasis on this mindset of the place to be within yourself where you're at your fullest potential to then navigate your life and everything you do in life better, including your negotiations. I can imagine at the moment I've actually got this puppy, right? He's not my particularly favorite breed, but he's a young Groodle running around with tons of enthusiasm.
Love
And
it.
the thing is, though, they make a lot of silly mistakes because technically they don't know how to do things. So my favorite
Absolutely.
dog that we have she's a Rottie. She's my princess, right? But if
Nice.
this young, positive, enthusiastic Groodle makes a technical mistake, he might get hurt by the Rottie, no matter how positively placed in his mindset he is.
Yeah, absolutely.
So there are still some key technical elements that we need to be able to employ and use. And you share one of those, for example, in the box, in the
Mm.
witness box when you're being cross-examined. What I'd love to dive into and hear from you is what are some of the technical elements of negotiations that you need to use to succeed, whether in custody or whether you're signing that book deal or you're getting this great business idea across the line? What are the technical aspects of negotiation that you
Yeah,
feel are really important?
You, one of the first is confidence. You've got to
Mm,
be able to go in with confidence. Yeah, and imagine walking across the yard and there's a whole race that you're about to sit down with and try and break bread with, have this conversation. And to do that, that's a very first, it's a very dangerous move inside, but it's a very ballsy move. So you've got to be able to do that and negotiate that for yourself. I'm going to walk in, chest out. When I say chest out enough not to make sure that you think you're the boss within that space, but also to show that you're confident. And we sit side by side in this negotiation and conversation. Second one, change your language to change the outcome. Because if you come in heavy and hot in any regard and it's all
mm,
about yourself, you're going to walk away with, probably more than likely not what you wanted out of that deal, even if it's a business deal for yourself. How do you create an environment where both parties are happy? And that's
mm,
the biggest thing for me. Imagine going in and I'll give you the greatest example, walking across and say, "Hey, we can go to war." And yeah, every time you jump in a show, you're going to worry about if I'm going to come up behind yourself or someone else is. Or I'm going to worry about someone else coming up to myself. What if we all were able to get on and just help one another during this journey? And I'd say, what would I do that? I don't care. And I said, can I ask you a question? Did you, back then, did you assault the police officer that arrested you? And they're like, no, why? I said, well, you want to assault me? Ain't I on your side? And they're like, yeah. And then, like, I'd ask them, am I on your side? Like, we're both in agreement we're against them, right? And they're like, yeah. I said, so did you assault the police officer? They're like, no. I said, have you assaulted any of the screws, which they were called back, obviously in that day, which is the prison term for prison officers? And they'd say, no. I say, so why would you want to assault me? You didn't assault those that arrested you or the people holding you here. Let's go and run amok and run a riot here. And I'm all for it. You up for it? And they're like, you're crazy. And I'm like, well, why would you want to assault me? And you won't even back me up on this. You explain it to me. And they'd sit there and I'd see the light bulb, their face would stop. They wouldn't say a word. And they're like, it's true, eh? And I was like, yeah, well, we're on the same side, ain't we? Let's get on. And we're good, and we'd shake hands. And when you shake hands, you got to imagine I'm shaking that hand and expecting the other hand to put something in the side of my head. Yeah, so that confidence, you've definitely got to go in, changing the language, definitely going in differently. And to change the language, you've got to pre-plan how you're going to have that conversation, how you're going to get them to see that from their light. Because if you don't do that, you're going in and you're saying, give me, give me, give me, give me, give me, it's my way. And there'll be anyone, just ego in general, is going to step up and say, look, the deal, we want it this way, rather than finding a happy medium where everyone benefits from it. And sometimes that might mean not getting what you think you're going to get out of it. If it was $1 million deal, you might get 800,000, but you got a 5-year contract over where you went in thinking you were going to get a 1-year or 3-year contract. You got a 5-year with 800K happy medium, and that's something where you've got to understand that battle. And then I think to myself, if I can get one of those, I could get 10 of those. So if I can get 800K, I can get 10 of those. If I can get 10 in a year, which I believe I can with that confidence I spoke about firstly, that's $8 million as a business per year. And that then builds on to the confidence you walked across the room with. So it's just really knuckling down and being able to understand the other side. Everyone wants to feel loved, cared for, valued, and mattered. So if you use those 4 principles, love, cared for, valued, and mattered, in a conversation, change that language, come in with confidence, but also understand the power of negotiation, and you'll find a happy medium that everyone walks away from. Back in the day, with your life. And I used to laugh about that, thinking your life in custody, but outside, if you make that wrong decision, it could cost you. When I say cost you your life, some people have taken their life, literally that end of the spectrum on around business. But it also, you could be dead at 25 and buried at 75, and that's because you've made a decision. It's backfired on yourself. You feel you've lost a deal. Now you're not good enough, and it tacked onto the back of your parents not loving you enough in your head. And that just becomes a very dangerous pathway for people.
Yeah, it's incredible the depth of your knowledge and how one amazing point after the next just flow, and the amount of thinking and development and understanding you have in these areas is just incredible, brother.
Got to sit with yourself. And we're too busy these days, well, apparently we're too busy and we don't have time. So those 2 things, have a look at your diary and look, for everybody out there, have a look at your diary and actually fill your diary in on a Friday for the following week and go, I've got 4 hours on Monday, 2 hours on Tuesday, 6 hours on Wednesday. Be able to do the things that you need to be doing, whether it's in your health, your finances, the life you want. And when I say life you want, how you upskill yourself in any way, shape, or form around business or life that you choose. And you start to understand that there's enough time. It just comes down to the prioritization of what your mindset puts it to. So you get to choose that journey, or you get to choose some bullshit. And I can guarantee you dish yourself out bullshit. No one would like me lying to them. So as soon as you start lying to yourself and that becomes your normal habit and behavior, what do you reckon your self-esteem is going to sit at 0, 5, 10, something of that nature. And now it's time to step up and do this business idea, this book, this life, this relationship. Just won't happen. It'll happen, but in a small sense. And yeah, you give something 5%, 20%, you're going to get a small percentage of return. And in the end, you're going to feel that that's not good enough and you're not good enough. So do yourself a favor, go all in, burn those boats. So, always, and when I say burn them, delete the numbers, delete the photos in past relationships, delete the past what you call mistakes, F ups, or stuff ups, whatever you want to call them. Start to say, what lessons did I actually get from them? And you'll flip that mentality, create a better reality all day, every day.
Yeah, and I love the way you use the words of burn those boats, because I heard back in the day when Alexander the Great was taking over the world, obviously there would have been a lot of bad stuff he did, but in his eyes of the world and those around him, they looked at it as a great achievement. And one of the things that he
Absolutely.
would do when he went to new lands, he'd arrive with all of his soldiers, and the first thing that they did was burn those boats. So there was no other
Big
way
time.
other than to succeed and take over those lands. So
Absolutely.
we can burn our own metaphorical boats to achieve the outcome that we're looking for. So I love the way you use that terminology.
It's, yeah, you want to put yourself under. When I was 12 years old and I hit the streets, I was homeless. I ran away from dad who was abusive, physically abusive. And I burned all the boats. When I hung jump out of that window, I didn't realize I burned the boats. I
Yeah.
look back on it now, I burned them definitely because made it very physically violent. And once you hang jump out of that window, you make a choice not to go back because I can guarantee you, mate, I would end up black and blue. And I went out on the streets, and once you're out there, you've got to make decisions that impact your life. Food that you eat, the roof you got over your head, not being abused by other people because I was 12 at the time. The decisions you have to make in real time at such a young age, you become a go-getter. So that the analogy of burning those boats, when you just throw it all into this bucket, I've done deals where I've pushed, house deposits in on these deals, and people are like, you're crazy. And I'm like, nah, I'm committed. And there
Mhm.
is a difference when you know that you're committed to your journey and you know that you're passionate about what you do and you know the outcomes that you've got. It's not a risk. It's an evolution. And that evolution is on the back of the education, the lived experience, those two things I spoke about before.
Yeah.
And the more you practice that, the more you believe it. And no doubt, Alexander the Great did the same. Landed on shore and said, "Burn those boats. We're winning. There's no
Mm.
other way." And that's it. And I would have done the same. I'll go out to that Colosseum, and you could have the greatest gladiator waiting for me. And I said, "Well," they go, "Oh, you're fighting, whoever it was, Zeuxis, and he hasn't lost." And I said, "Well, today's the day he
Yeah.
loses." And that's the mentality you've got to have. And even if you get to a position where, whether it's a financial thing, you're aiming for $100,000, you make $30,000. Did you lose? You learn plenty. So you're on the right pathway. Keep going. But we'll beat up on the 70,000 we didn't make, or the choices we haven't made, or the decisions we haven't taken so far, rather than the 30 new things that we've added to our life to high performance our life. So, and whether that's on a health journey, a relationship journey, more values, morals, beliefs for me, I had to build those into myself from that cheating individual. And I celebrated all of those. I was like, you know what, you're proud because this girl did drop into your inbox and you were able to just say, like, send that message away and be able to handle your emotions in that moment where the male side of you didn't get involved in that conversation. So
Yes.
once you're at that, you've got to ask yourself what's the strategies when that does happen,
Mhm.
and all of these other things. And that means you're planning for, to make sure that you don't fail. And the old saying, planning, failing to plan is planning to fail. If you don't know the strategy to deal with, a sinking ship, and you haven't learned to swim, now you're in some trouble. If you don't even know how to put that life jacket on, now you're in some more trouble. So, on the planes, you get people. I get on these planes, and I still listen to where the life jacket is and how to put that on. Why? Because if this plane does go down and they have gone down and I am a survivor, well, guess what? I'm reaching under that seat and I know exactly where my life jacket is. I know how to put it on. I know how to blow it up. I know how to turn on the light. And you'll see most people, if they got in that position, more than likely they've ignored it because it's become just the same thing, desensitized. Oh, here we go. If the oxygen mask drops down, they're just like, whatever.
Mm.
Uh, People will get into trouble. And I've seen it happen time and time again in life. And I'm like, well, life's there. Life's coming for you. And if you don't have these strategies, guess what's going to happen? You're going to get hurt.
Yeah. And you speak also about knowing what you want, going for it, right?
Absolutely.
If you don't, you can get hurt, like you've just mentioned. I
Imagine
can,
BJJ going into a ring and knowing that this person is strong in one way and not prepping for it,
yes.
because like having counters to it. Because if you don't, you're going to get tapped out very quickly. You could be the greatest striker, but they're going to take you to the ground. I've seen it where people are lying on their backs and they've had to engage them and trying to get down an elbow and punch them. Next thing they're in some particular, lock, and that's it. It's all over. Why? Because you didn't do enough prep work to get yourself into a position to understand that hey, he's got me in this. Here's how I get out of that.
Now,
And
tell me, brother, we're going to see you on the BJJ mat sometime soon.
mate, I've got big shout out to Diego and the boys. They always get into me and they're like, come down, come down. I did a podcast with one of the boys and they've got a couple of studios. Biggest thing my problems, I've got a lot of injuries, and my
Yeah.
biggest fear is, getting a shoulder pulled back or something, popping my shoulder out again, or I've had 3 knee recos, and I just love training, and I think if I get into that position, I know a lot of the boys have got little nigglers, and I just don't want to get in a position. In saying that, I obviously I box as much as I can, do a bit of Muay Thai, but
Yeah.
I definitely love to get down on the ground and do it with someone that's probably at a really high level that understands the injuries and what positions probably not to get into, but also teach me those positions as well.
And as
So
a
I'm
wi-
open to it.
and as a wise man once said, doing it in a way where you've built the environment where both parties are happy. In the words of
Absolutely.
Jeff Morgan himself.
Absolutely. Like, because in the end, if I don't have that conversation, I walk in, you and I are, the male ego gets in
Mm.
the way and we're both going at it. And you go, oh, I've got this move, bang. And, because of my shoulders instability, it will pop out a lot easier than somebody else's that hasn't. And all of a sudden, now I'm trying to get it back in. And if I don't, now I need an operation to get it back in. So, you weigh up the options and you're like, is it really worth it? But if you get the right person, you have the right conversations, they can say, I can put you into this position, but just understand it. And here's how you would get out of it. That'd be awesome. I'd love to do that.
And I also love the vulnerability that you've just shared, because a lot of our yarn today has been about knowing what you want, going for it, positive mindset, anything's possible, that sort of stuff, which is all true. And I love this message. At the same
Absolutely.
time, you've been vulnerable in sharing the fact that because of injuries in your body, there is that limitation. And
Yeah,
so I think also what this highlights is no matter how switched on you are mentally, sometimes there may be limitations you experience in your life. And
mm,
then it could become looking at how to navigate those limitations, whether you're going to let them block you, how you're
absolutely.
going to go about it. And it sounds like this is what you're doing, right? Because you haven't said, hey, I'm not going to do jujitsu at all. You said, if I find the right person with the experience, hey, you'll give it a crack. So,
Absolutely. And I'm happy to pay for that too. Like, because in the end, that's an investment in protection for yourself or feeling strong about yourself. BJJ is such a strong, and I'd recommend it to anybody. By all means, get out there and do that, especially for females to feel strong in one way, shape, or form. And there are things that they could do in that world that, you get the average person and you'll be able to actually flip them into a position and do something that would protect you and maybe even save your life. So, find different ways. I call them different fire exits. You have only one exit within the building. This strategy, I'm going to, I walk across this yard, and if it doesn't work, this conversation, I'm just going to fight it out. Um, and you've got 20 blokes across the yard. It's not a good strategy. So, what can I do? What happens if they start to get a bit thin? How do I have that conversation? So, I was having these 13 layers deep or 10 layers deep, realistically, conversations, because what about if they said this? What about if it goes this way? And that by doing that, I call it slowing it down to speed it up. You're actually thinking about the process that you're about to take. And I'd rather slow that down, do some planning as an example. Let's say it was a business and take 6 months to get that off and start that with a real solid plan and framework behind that to create the roadmap of that business. Then just jump in and go willy-nilly and now we've got to go back and we've missed these components of the business. We don't even have a business plan. We don't know the roadmap to what is the framework to it, and how do we create the resources or the rest of the business to it. And once people understand that, you can just say, hey, just pause for a moment. Let's just take a moment, have a look at it, jump out, shine a lens on the world. And this is how we'd love for it to look, and this is how we can perceive it to be. And if that takes 6 months, that's a cool thing too. So don't be afraid to slow it down and speed it up. That's that's one of the biggest tips I could give anybody. I had the luxury of slowing it down for 20 years in custody, in and out of custody, to be able to then come out and say, hey, I've got a pure intention. I'm not going to work in an office space. I've been in custody for 20 years. I don't want to be in another prison in my head for 20 years, another 20 years. I'm going to do something that allows me to travel the world. And what are you good at? And it crossed over what I was passionate about. So be intentional about your thoughts and create those 10 fire exits when you go into anything. And, so even if 8 of those were burning, you could walk out the other 2. You just walk out, not a problem. It's easy. Versus not having that, having that one exit that's full of fire, and all of a sudden you perish within that space.
Absolutely. And people even speak about in the self-defense context, if you're going into an environment that you need to be very wary, make sure that you know where the exits are, because that's what's going to save you. And
Who's around you, like especially if for women, especially knowing your environment and knowing even how to look. I learned from the surveillance. Obviously, back in the day, we used to be under surveillance quite a lot. So be able to look in reflections of mirrors. Stop at a shop if you feel maybe this person's following me. Be able to look in the reflection of the mirror like you're looking at something within the shop. And then those little tips and tricks, even in a car vision mirror for a female, go up into your lipstick and just look behind yourself. Walk into a place where you feel safe. Turn on your camera as an example, on social media where you can put on a live, and just if someone's close to you, just turn around and say, mate, how can I help you? If you've been in my space for quite some time, and obviously turn that live camera on that person, and feel a bit safe within that space. So having these strategies, they just give you an out. And sometimes that out means that person might just turn around and walk off from yourself. And, if you hadn't done that, could end up in a bad position for yourself.
yeah, so if you're in the heat of a negotiation, things aren't going the way that you want them to go, by understanding the ways to exit can give you that breathing space, right, in that negotiation to then come back if you need to and take off when you've regrouped and got your head all level and everything again.
Absolutely. Yes, a lot of people I find going to negotiate blows me away, to be honest with you. So without understanding the vision of the other company. And I'm like, how can you, if that's their vision, do you know, if I even mention that to a company, like I'm impressed that you know that. And I'm like, well, wouldn't I know that? Because I need to know we're going into business together, and what your outcomes are aligned with mine. How can I merge that conversation together and speak it in your language, not mine? And I literally will go off their website and, social media or whatever it may be, anything I can get my hands on, media releases, and allow myself to speak their language. And that provide the solutions to their problems. And that becomes an easy in, because in the end, they're hearing, it's like, a new relationship. Hey, mate, you're beautiful. The girl that's on the other side, you're beautiful. And saying the
Thanks for
right
those
things.
compliments, by the way.
And today's people, they love them, right? So if you can speak that language, they're smiling on. They might be sitting there, poker faced, but in general, that negotiation inside, they're smiling, and I can feel that smile. That energy won't lie.
Yeah.
So I can sit there, and if I'm talking your language, you can be sitting there, and it might even be the slightest move of their hands, things that they're doing, starting to relax, where they came in a bit sort of and poker face hands have crossed over, and now the hands are down by their side. They're starting to conversate. Yeah, that really works well with us. What are you thinking? And we've turned a lot of 1 year deals into 5 year deals. And that's because we speak the importance of consistency.
Yes.
And being able to negotiate, you're not going to get something out of lifting weights over one session. So one session for us is 1 year, where you're doing a multitude of sessions, but it's just at breaking point, starting point. We want to make sure that we're adding layers upon that of consistency, and that consistency builds the outcomes that you want. And if that was muscle and we kept lifting it, then we're going to build strong muscle. If we do that within the business and have that explanation to them, they're able to see that quite clear, and they're very impressed and say, you've done a lot of due diligence, and we're more than happy to work with yourself. And most people just go in saying, I want the money. I want this deal. I have to get this deal. My business relies on it. Negotiate on a level where you seek to understand. Very important. If you don't seek to understand your opponent in the BJJ ring, he's going to do you. And because he's going to say, I know that this person's weakness is this, all I need to do is get him to the ground, and now you're in trouble.
Yes.
As you'd know. So it's a huge word, seek to understand whoever's on the other side of the negotiation, whether it's a culture, and I'm talking even within business, whether it's in a space. And when I'm saying space, you jump in an MMA ring. What are their strengths? What are their weaknesses? What will they go for? How do I get out of that lock? Because if you don't know, I can guarantee you, it's going to end very quickly.
Yes. And the research that you're speaking about in understanding what their interests are, what they're about, can even sometimes help you decide that you don't want to be there in the first place.
And sometimes it flips the other way. You go, wow, this doesn't really align with my values and what I'd actually represent. It's happened to me numerous times where money over recent years, hundreds of thousands of dollars, I just was not aligned to what the narrative was. And I'm happy to step out and move in another direction. And I wish them all the very best. If I don't take that pathway, I still wish them all the best in business. And I hope that it's just not what I want, and nor do I want to be associated with. So, what are your ethics? What are your values? Those sorts of conversations have to occur as well, so that when you get there, it's not just about the money. It's about who you actually are and what you represent. And coming from the background I did, it's my partner doesn't even know who I am in these conversations. She's like, I just can't even picture you in jail. I can't picture you robbing a bank. I can't picture you. Just like, you've got to become that chameleon in that space, but also be of value to yourself, most importantly. So deep dive yourself. This ain't aligned with who I am. I'm stepping away from the deal. And sometimes you might think you're losing that deal. You're actually gaining yourself, and gaining yourself is worth more than any deal you ever do over a table.
Yes. And what about in situations where you've got to be there at the table? You've got to be in an environment where actually you do know what the other party's motivated by. You do know what the interests are. You actually don't want to be there, but you got to be there. So an example you mentioned earlier was you're in the being cross-examined in a courtroom where you know that the person that you're going to be cross-examined by or negotiating with is going to be asking you stuff and wants an outcome from this discussion, this cross-examine form of negotiation that is very different to what you want. The judge is there, and perhaps sometimes judges might have opinions and might hear things in different ways. Some people that are being cross-examined might feel like the judge is against them even. And if you're in that sort of an environment, how do you shape your thoughts and your energetic structure to be positively influential so that you can get the outcome that you're wanting, even though the interests don't align?
The truth doesn't take long to come out because you speak it. If you have to think it, then you're making up something within yourself. So if you're not practicing something in a habit and ritual sense around business, around life, around relationships, around a courtroom, so I'd go away and I'd practice and I'd think about the questions he'd ask me around certain situations. And when they came up, I was able to answer that really confidently, tall. I lied through my teeth back then because I obviously didn't want to get longer time or get convicted on that charge or whatever it would have been. But in general, it was the way you presented it. So chest is proud, you're coming out with the answers really quickly, really smoothly. And you say, I know exactly what happened on that day because I was there and this is what happened. And there's no, two ways about it, but in a nice way. And making sure even your language, the tone that it came out, even if you said, so I put it to you that you're X, Y, or Z, and it might have been an insulting term or thought or something of that nature. How do you conduct yourself where you manage your emotions in that thing and say F you, and you start to go down that path where you lose yourself. So to be able to do that, and I'd say that's the same for any negotiation, keeping that strength, that power stance, 3 minutes, every morning. I used to do that in myself. Hands on my waist, shoulders are back, chest is proud. And I used to do it more for posture than anything. And then over the years, I found that it lowered cortisol, raised testosterone, and that, obviously became something that Tony Robbins was very well known for, to be able to teach people. So I'd do that, but it was more about my posture across the chest and probably looking at my chest as a younger kid more often than not. But to then go into that translated into the courtroom because I was able to sit strong, proud, confident, and I learned too that I had to change my language to change the outcome because if I didn't, if I got into court and spoke pig Latin or if I was swearing, I don't effing know about what happened down effing the street, and people would then say, oh, he's already from that background. And it was just something that they, unfortunately associate swearing with. He's come from a background that obviously isn't one of good nature. So I learned how to speak well within custody. And it was more around how I could get out of, conversations with police when I was out and about. You've been in trouble before, and then give a fake name and stand there like it was absolute. Yep, no worries, mate. You're right to go. And I'd walk off, and I'd be wanted for many things. And that builds confidence when you do that repetitively. But then I had to look at myself and say, is this truly serving yourself? Yeah, you're great at it, but you're actually being fake to yourself and the person on the other side. And then you've got to flip that scenario for yourself and say, wait, you've got a great skill set. You can still be that confident version and do that skills audit, but now not destructively, constructively, and transition the great skill that you had into a positive, not a negative outcome.
Yeah, and I feel like one of the experiences that you've been able to benefit from through all this is the way that you've been able to embrace your own shadow. And I
Huge.
wonder whether that's one of the reasons why you're so attractive to so many people, because we all have a shadow. We all have beautiful, wonderful sides of us, and we all have dark shadow sides to us. But in the society that we live, quite often our shadow is suppressed. So, what can you share for people right now that might help them in embracing their own shadow?
I always say a couple of things. Firstly, take off the mask. We all put on this mask, and whether you go into a corporate office, you put the suit on, and now you're Mr. Corporate or Mrs. Corporate. You go home and you become, googie googie to your child. You become a whole different person. So we all sort of end up being a different person throughout that time. But is it truly aligned to who you are and what you want to do? And once again, so being able to understand that conversation, I get people to take off this mask that they put on and pretend to be every single day. They don't like it. They tell themselves, oh, it's great to go out to work and be noble and all of the above. And I totally agree with yourself. But if I gave you the option and waved the magic wand, would you actually do that? If you could get paid for anything and you knew you wouldn't fail, is this what you would truly choose? And they're like, no, no way. And I say, well, what is that? And how can we make that happen? The second thing, that shadow you speak about, it's following you around, and you can try and tell yourself that you're somebody else, but when you look in that mirror tomorrow morning who you actually are. And if you're not built well, don't beat up on that. Just understand and recognize that and go from unconscious to conscious and say, I actually want to change. Or remember going back to that first thought process, here's violence is my response. If you got arky with me, does that truly serve myself? Let's shift and change it. Now I use violence. You could use how you speak to yourself in the morning. You get up and you go, oh, I just never amount to anything. We come from a family line that never done that, or Aboriginal people don't do that, or whatever it may be that you get in that scenario. shift and change that first thought, because that loops on repeat. And that's
Mm.
how you're built, as a pattern of behavior. And neurologically, you will not change that until you break that. And I always say, sometimes you get up in the morning and you're about to walk out to the lounge room, grab an apple and bite into it. And people are like, why would, like, how's that change anything? I said, it changes the loop of behavior that you get up, you sit there, I'm going to put this music on, Mariah Carey. Now I'm crying about my ex-partner or the business deal that didn't go right. You've got to be able to negotiate with yourself and say, is this what I truly want out of my life? And what are your non-negotiables within that, individual, that shadow that carries, follows you around everywhere? What are the non-negotiables that you're about to deliver to yourself that gets rid of that version that you don't want walking beside yourself? I'm proud of that shadow, that I've used the past to create the future.
Mm.
Every lesson was a blessing. It happened for me, not to me. And you look at that perception correction, or change your language to change the outcome, and you start to see and understand how that shadow became an extra version of myself to lift me up whenever I was down and I was alone by myself. So that's how I flipped that shadow from, the bad guy that was in the dark with the balaclava on, to taking that mask off and actually being a strength. I'm going to lift you up when no one else is around. And guess what? I'll never let you down, son. And that meant that I always had someone by my side. It's probably, look back on it now, my grandmother said to me that she never dies. And I was
Mm.
like, what are you talking about? She's like, my spirit will forever walk this planet when you carry this knowledge with yourself. I look through, that shadow, and our ancestors are living within that shadow. And I literally, it sounds crazy. I've been to Troy recently. I've been to the Colosseum. Been to these
Nice.
different magical Gallipoli. And I'd say, hey, if there's any spirits here, jump on board. We're going to go for a ride around the planet, and I'm going to show you what you missed out on.
Mm.
But you're going to give me the strength that you had within yourself. And anyone wants to get on board, I'm here. And like, I literally feel that I get this strength from each of these places and spaces, and whether it's a little subconscious thing, it still puts me in a great position around my mindset. If I can, that person beside me can, and we're going to walk side by side to greatness.
That's beautiful, brother.
Mm.
It's
And
it's
that person will never leave you. Every time there's a bit of shadow, just remember that person's the old version that used to walk, people would walk over, and that person now is the person that carries the knowledge by his side and gives you that extra bit of strength when you need it.
Yeah. So by embracing the shadow, like you speak, allowing you to become fuller, stronger, and
Absolutely.
and to live from the place where you're embracing everything
I
rather
had
than
too
trying to
much that
hide. Yeah.
Absolutely. I had so much that my shadow had to help me carry it. And when I
Mm.
say so much greatness, that shadow had to walk beside me to help me carry it. And I'm grateful for that person. And I'm grateful from those lessons when I was down there to who I am today, standing tall and proud. And especially as an Aboriginal man, because, we're not meant to. And we started in the basement. We started 10 layers deep in the basement, and our families didn't do it. You can't do that. You should be in custody. Are you hitting all your women? But yeah, that's all. The stats are all of that. So that's, to be able to get out of that and be who I am today. I'm proud of that journey. Oh yeah, and on that journey, there wasn't proud moments, but there was plenty of lessons that became blessings.
So good, brother.
Mm,
You have blown us all the way with such incredible wisdom. And I know I'm going to be re-listening time and again to this particular podcast episode. What I'm going to do right now is something that's a tradition for each of our episodes, which is give our listeners three takeaway weapons, three takeaway tools, three powerful resources that they can
love that.
use based on what you've shared today when negotiating outcomes in their work, their business, in their life, in their family structures, and everything else where negotiations belong. And these are three based on what you've said, Jeff, and because of all the wisdom, every sentence you speak is wisdom. So, this is only
Yeah.
three. It's these. Number one, I believe that you've shared so much wisdom about journeying within yourself. And if we can all, if you guys listening in, if you can journey within yourself in your own life to understand, to grow, to become better, then you're going to be stronger, living higher, and negotiating from a place of full strength. Number two is Jeff's sharing of that metaphorical burning the boats so that there's no way out, he speaks of. Getting to the place of understanding what you really want, what you want to achieve, what it is for you, and making sure there's no other way than making that happen. Jeff spoke about putting mortgages on the line. But what's also really interesting is the element of vulnerability that Jeff has shared, because as we burn the boats, being vulnerable in the process, but still being confident to achieve what's important. So there's no other way other than your way, the right way. And number three, I love the way you shared, and this is the third takeaway for your own negotiations, is taking responsibility. Because if you can take responsibility in your own negotiations, then what you can do is create the changes, create the impacts in the right ways from that place of responsibility, rather than being the victim, being the cause, rather than, as Jeff says, it happening to you. What was the ending of that one? The other side, Jeff? Not
That
to you.
happens for you.
Happens for you. So taking
Yes.
responsibility doesn't happen to you, happens for you. Yeah,
Don't be bitter, be better. Don't be the victim, be the victor. So shift all those terms, you look at it and that's what it's about.
And as you stand here, brother to brother, you're a great example and a leader and a great resource of Black excellence. Someone that so many people in our Aboriginal communities can look at and say, hey, you know what? Jeff's done it, so can I. And you're doing this in the spirit of Black excellence. And I love the way you're doing this as well in Australia, but also globally. And I think it's something that says there's a guy, Richard Bannister, who was the first person to ever run, I think it was like 100 meters or something in less
Yeah,
than 10 seconds. People thought it
correct.
was impossible. But once they saw Richard run this particular time, they realized it was possible, and then everyone started doing it. And so if you're listening to Jeff now thinking, man, I've got to shake my life up, make things happen. Well, Jeff's done it, and so can you, which is just incredible. Is there
Priceless.
anything
And
you'd like?
remember,
Yeah,
you'll never be younger than today. So don't beat up if you're 50, 60, even 70. You can still make it happen. Just don't look back at your past, because you've got a lot of skills auditing that you could do and say, I've got great strength around X, Y, or Z within my life, and I'm going to take that into today and moving forward. I'll never be younger than today. Be the champion of being a beginner and just start. And that's all you got to do, and move forward towards define what you want from life, and then what are your non-negotiables, and negotiate that to yourself. Write it out, and then before, slow it down to speed it up. Be very intentional and directional, and that way, once you go in and you go all in, there's no way back. And the only way is you've either got to come forward or you die. And to me, I'm like, well, here's the one of the most important things. I'd rather struggle with the hardship of unpacking my past and building my future for a year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years,
mm,
but set up the rest of my life to be the best of my life. Whereas most people will not challenge that and live with that version all of their life. True
so
story.
good.
True story. Be conscious, because consciousness means that, and it's a very, people just go, oh, consciousness, mindfulness. But if you actually sat with yourself and say, actually, this isn't what I want. And people go, oh, I'm okay. Oh, we've got a great house. We've got this. So I'll run them through a series of questions once again to get them to see what they say, and they'll just sit there and go, oh, I've realized I want more from life. So are you living or existing is the question I ask them first. I'm living. And then I ask them these questions. I go, can I ask you again? They go, I'm existing. And it's not me telling them that you're existing, you should have $1 million, or you should be doing X, Y, or Z. They've said that to themselves, but not lived up to the version that they know they should be or want to be within their life. And they could be, because if I can, they can. And you ain't anybody until you are you. And that means that you build those pillars so strong that you walk out with that chest high, walking across that prison yard. And when you sit down and have that conversation with the other people, which is yourself, you're going to have that confidence to actually say, you know what, I need to veer left here, turn right there. And I'm committed to the journey to the better self. And most people will look at, oh, I haven't done it. It's been 10 years. I'm no good and all of the above. Just focus on the future of what you can rather than what you haven't.
Yeah, and you'd probably agree, Jeff, that when people aren't taking charge of their life as you're speaking, if they are existing rather than living, sometimes
Absolutely.
it can come from their own fear of what may be at bay if they do change. But I
That
also,
invisible backpack, unpack that invisible backpack,
yeah,
and I'll give you a real quick tool that they can use. Fear, right? To unpack that invisible backpack, the negative side of it. Fear is feelings that write out the feelings that comes from that experience, the emotions that came from it, that caused an action, that caused a reaction. Does that make sense? So
mm,
the feeling was I wasn't good enough because your partner cheated. The emotion was sadness because I lost my partner, or I'm not good enough. The action was I stuffed myself full of food. The reaction was I became overweight and now I lack confidence within my life and I'm on medication. So would you like that? I'd put that to somebody. They're like, no. So I want you to write fear out again from the same experience, but was the lesson that became a blessing? So what feeling would you like to feel from that experience? And I say, I feel strong that I'm able to see it through a different lens and perspective. What's the emotion? The emotion is happiness because I realized that I let go of someone that didn't value me or whatever it may be in your own terms. What's the action that comes from it? I'm going to stand up and create a very intentional life and build myself of value. So when I meet someone on the other side, they're going to be of the same value. And you just go through these scenarios, and all of a sudden, you don't have to worry about being in the wrong space at the wrong time because you were around the right person at the right time all day, every day. And the reaction from that is the life you want, as an example. So that's how you use fear, and a little flip on that perspective around how you unpack your invisible backpack. That's one layer deep. There's
mm,
many layers, but at least that will help somebody start to head in the right direction. And if you can do one thing, you can do everything.
so good. Is there any final parting words of love that you would like to share?
Yeah, we're all rich already as Aboriginal people. We're abundant. We are rich in nature, in culture, in strength, in love. And what I mean by that, Mother Earth provides for us. And whether it's the food, the air, the water, sunlight, that all charges you and it is free and it makes you, doesn't say one word to you, but it'll make you feel great laying in the sun. It will make you feel great walking in the bush. As an example, it will make you feel great going for a dip on a hot day. So understand you're already rich and abundant. When you do that, the rest will be just magical because no matter what happens, you'll always be rich.
So good. Jeffrey Morgan, thanks for connecting today. Us.
Thanks for having me. I loved it. And I appreciate your time, energy, and effort, brother. And thanks for having me on. And for all those people out there, if I can, you can.